He slapped my son and humiliated him at our wedding. What happened next broke everyone's heart. Hello everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories. Maria sat gracefully at her vanity table, her delicate fingers gliding through the strands of her long brown hair. The golden glow of the lamp casting a warm halo around her reflection. Her heart swelled with anticipation. Today was not just any day, it was the beginning of a new chapter. A fresh start, a moment she had dreamed of for so long. Her pristine white wedding dress hung elegantly on a rack nearby, its delicate lace shimmering softly under the light. Next to it, a bouquet of fresh hydrangeas, their vibrant blues and purples a striking contrast to the ivory fabric, filled the air with a sweet, calming fragrance. In the adjacent room, Matthew, her 8-year-old son, played happily with his favorite toy, his laughter a joyful melody that danced through the air. His innocent delight was contagious. And for a moment, Maria let herself revel in the simple beauty of the moment. She had always been protective of her son, cherishing his laughter, his wide-eyed curiosity, and his boundless energy. Despite everything they had been through, she had promised herself that this wedding would be a joyous occasion for both of them. Matthew, are you ready yet? She called out, her voice carrying a note of affectionate amusement. Yes, Mom, I'm putting on my bow tie. Matthew's voice came from the other room, cheerful yet slightly clumsy, as if he were struggling with the knot. Maria smiled to herself, already picturing the adorably crooked bow tie he would undoubtedly come out wearing. Her son always tried his best to please her, even if he wasn't the most coordinated. Today, she wanted him to look perfect, not because it mattered to her, but because she didn't want anyone, not a single soul, to have a reason to criticize him. She knew all too well how people could be, how quick they were to judge a child's behavior, his manners, his very existence. Just then, the door opened, and James stepped inside. He was impeccably dressed in a sharp black suit, his tall frame and neatly styled dark hair exuding an effortless charm that had once captivated Maria. There was something undeniably magnetic about him, the way he carried himself, the way he spoke with quiet authority. But as his gaze flickered past Maria and landed on Matthew, his expression shifted ever so slightly. A faint crease appeared between his brows, subtle yet unmistakable. Matthew, why is your bow tie crooked? Come here, let me fix it, James said, his tone firm, devoid of the warmth he used with Maria. Matthew hesitated for just a fraction of a second before stepping forward, his small hands fumbling at the fabric, as if trying to correct the mistake himself. But James was quicker. He bent down and, with a swift, precise motion, adjusted the bow tie, his grip firmer than necessary. Matthew flinched ever so slightly, stepping back instinctively. You need to be more careful, James said, his voice laced with a quiet reprimand. Today is an important day. Don't embarrass your mother. The words lingered in the air, heavier than they should have been. Maria's smile faltered, her fingers stilling on her hairbrush. She glanced at Matthew, who had lowered his eyes, his small shoulders stiff with the effort of holding himself still. A faint prickle of unease crept up Maria's spine. James, he's just a little nervous, she said gently, attempting to ease the tension. It's a big day for all of us. James nodded, but his expression remained unchanged, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. He turned back to the mirror, adjusting his own bow tie with practiced precision. You should get ready, he said after a pause. The guests are almost all here. Maria watched as he left the room, the door clicking softly behind him. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to shake off the feeling that had begun to stir deep in her chest. Maybe James was just on edge. Maybe the weight of the day was making him more irritable than usual. And yet, as she turned back to her reflection, a flicker of doubt passed through her mind, a whisper of something she couldn't quite name. The wedding ceremony unfolded like a scene from a dream. Sunlight streamed through the grand stained glass windows of the chapel, casting a kaleidoscope of colors onto the polished marble floor. Rows of elegantly dressed guests turned their heads as Maria made her entrance, the train of her ivory gown trailing behind her like a river of silk. Her heart pounded against her ribcage, her hands tightening ever so slightly around her bouquet of hydrangeas. She was supposed to be filled with unshakable joy, yet a quiet unease coiled in the pit of her stomach. stubborn and unrelenting. At the altar, James stood waiting, the very picture of composure. His sharp black suit fit him perfectly, his expression one of quiet confidence. To the watching crowd, he looked like the perfect groom, charming, poised, every inch the devoted man pledging his life to the woman he loved. Maria forced a smile, stepping forward with measured grace. But her mind drifted to the moment earlier when James had tightened Matthew's bow tie with just a little too much force. The flicker of unease in her son's eyes had not gone unnoticed. As she reached the altar, James took her hand, his grip firm, his skin warm against hers. She glanced at Matthew, who stood to the side in his tiny tuxedo, his hands clasped in front of him. He was watching her, his small face unreadable. For a split second, Maria wanted to kneel beside him, to whisper in his ear, to promise him that everything would be okay. But the moment passed, and the ceremony began. The officiant's voice rang through the chapel, solemn and steady, weaving words of love and commitment. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, and the air crackled with expectation. Maria felt James's fingers tighten slightly around hers as he spoke his promises, promises of loyalty, of devotion, of forever. And yet, beneath his carefully measured words, Maria couldn't shake the sensation that something wasn't quite right. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was soft but steady. "I promise to love you, to stand by you, to build a life with you." The words felt weighty on her tongue, as though she were laying bricks upon a foundation she had not yet examined closely enough. She glanced at Matthew again. His small hands clenched the fabric of his tuxedo, his expression caught between uncertainty and hope. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced. James leaned in, his lips brushing against Maria's in a kiss that should have felt like the beginning of something beautiful, something eternal. The guests erupted into applause, a sea of smiles and delighted whispers filling the chapel. Maria forced herself to return the kiss, to let herself be swept up in the grand illusion of it all. But when she pulled back, her eyes immediately sought out Matthew. He was clapping along with the rest of the guests, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. A twinge of something sharp and painful twisted inside Maria. As they turned to walk down the aisle, hands intertwined, the cheers of their loved ones surrounding them, she told herself that she had done the right thing, that this was what she had always wanted, a stable life, a loving husband, a future free from uncertainty. Yet, deep down, something inside her whispered a quiet warning. And as she stepped out into the golden afternoon light, her fingers still wrapped around James's, she couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that, despite the vows they had just exchanged, the story of their love was far from the fairy tale she had hoped it would be. The reception unfolded in a dazzling blur of laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft melody of a string quartet. The grand ballroom shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off the polished floors where elegantly dressed guests swayed to the rhythm of a slow waltz. Maria stood at the center of it all, her ivory gown flowing gracefully as she smiled and nodded at well-wishers who toasted to her new life. But beneath the surface, a quiet unease gnawed at her, like an unwelcome shadow lurking at the edges of her perfect evening. Matthew sat at a nearby table, his small fingers tracing patterns on the pristine white tablecloth. His plate remained untouched, the rich aroma of roasted lamb and buttery potatoes failing to stir his appetite. Every now and then, his gaze flickered toward James, who was engaged in deep conversation with a group of business associates. His laughter smooth, his gestures effortlessly charismatic, the picture of a man in control, a man who belonged in this world of wealth and refinement. Maria excused herself from a conversation and made her way toward her son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Crouching beside him, Matthew hesitated before nodding, but his eyes, those expressive, knowing eyes, betrayed him. "I'm fine," he mumbled. Before Maria could press further, a warm arm wrapped around her waist. "James, come, love," he murmured, his voice as smooth as silk. "It's time for our first dance." A round of applause filled the ballroom as James led her onto the dance floor. The orchestra began to play a soft, romantic melody, and Maria felt herself being swept into his embrace. his movements confident and practiced. To the watching guests, they must have seemed like the perfect couple, two souls intertwined in a flawless, elegant waltz. But Maria could feel it. The way his grip on her waist was just a little too firm. The way his breath fanned against her cheek as he whispered, "Relax, darling, smile." She forced herself to comply, tilting her chin upward, her lips curving into a delicate, practiced smile. The room spun around them, a blur of candlelight and opulence. And for a fleeting moment, Maria wished she could lose herself in it, wished she could silence the gnawing doubts that clawed at her heart. As the final note of the waltz echoed through the ballroom, James dipped her low, his lips brushing against her ear as he murmured, "See? Perfect." The applause thundered around them, but Maria barely heard it. Her gaze darted toward Matthew, who sat stiffly in his chair, his small hands balled into fists. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, Maria knew, her son saw it too. This wasn't perfection. This was a performance. The night dragged on in a haze of laughter, swirling gowns, and the endless clinking of crystal glasses. Maria played her part well, smiling at guests, accepting congratulations, and allowing James to keep a firm yet possessive hand on the small of her back. But beneath the glimmering facade of happiness, her mind churned with unease. She stole glances at Matthew, who remained unusually quiet, his small figure hunched in his chair as he traced invisible lines on the tablecloth. His eyes, dark pools of unspoken thoughts, flitted around the room, watching everything, absorbing everything. At one point, Maria excused herself, slipping away from James's grasp under the pretense of fresh air. She made her way onto the balcony, where the cool night breeze kissed her flushed cheeks. The city stretched out before her, a glittering expanse of lights and movement, but none of it soothed the tightness in her chest. A soft shuffle of footsteps broke her thoughts. "Mom?" Maria turned to find Matthew standing in the doorway, his small face illuminated by the golden glow of the chandeliers inside. His voice was hesitant, careful, too careful for a child his age. She knelt in front of him, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "What is it, sweetheart?" Matthew hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before stepping closer. His little hands clutched at the fabric of her dress. "Do we have to stay?" he whispered. Maria's breath hitched. The weight of his words settled heavily between them. She swallowed, trying to force a reassuring smile. "It's just for tonight, darling. It's a special night." Matthew bit his lip, his expression unreadable for a moment before he spoke again. "He doesn't love you." Maria flinched as though she had been struck. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she could do nothing but stare at her son, her perceptive, brilliant little boy who saw too much and understood even more. She opened her mouth, searching for the right words, but nothing came. How could she lie to him when he already knew the truth? "Matthew," she began, but he shook his head. "I don't want him to be my dad," he whispered, his voice trembling now, barely audible over the distant hum of music. "I don't want you to be sad." Maria's eyes burned with unshed tears. She pulled him into her arms, holding him close as the weight of his words settled into her bones. The grand celebration continued behind them, laughter and music pouring from the ballroom like a perfectly rehearsed symphony. But here, in the quiet solitude of the balcony, reality stood stark and undeniable. This wasn't happiness. This wasn't love. And Matthew had seen through it all. The celebration carried on in a dazzling blur of music, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. But Maria felt as if she were moving through a dream, one where everything looked beautiful on the surface but crumbled the moment she reached out to touch it. After her conversation with Matthew, she couldn't shake the unease settling deep in her bones. The boy had always been perceptive, but tonight, his words had cut deeper than anything she had ever allowed herself to admit. James remained the perfect host, his arm draped around her as they made their rounds through the room, greeting guests, accepting well wishes. His grip on her waist was firm, a silent reminder of the image they were meant to uphold. To everyone around them, they were the picture of love, the embodiment of a perfect union. But Maria felt suffocated beneath the weight of it. At some point in the evening, James excused himself to speak with a group of business associates. Leaving Maria momentarily alone, she exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. But then, a familiar voice broke through the hum of conversation. "You look beautiful tonight." Maria turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. Standing before her, looking both out of place and perfectly composed, was Daniel. Her heart stuttered, an involuntary reaction she hated herself for. He was as she remembered, tall, effortlessly confident, but there was something in his eyes tonight, something unreadable beneath the casual smirk he wore. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured, glancing around nervously. "And yet, here I am," he said smoothly, lifting a glass of champagne to his lips. "Couldn't resist the chance to see you." Maria swallowed hard. There was an undeniable electricity between them, one that hadn't dulled despite everything. Despite the years. Despite the choices that had led them here. "You need to leave," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. "If James sees you." Daniel's expression darkened, the smirk fading. "And what? He'll make a scene? He'll remind everyone in this room that you belong to him?" His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it, a restrained anger simmering beneath the surface. "Tell me, Maria, is that really what you want?" She wanted to say yes, wanted to tell him that this was her life now, that she had made her choice and she was going to stand by it. But the words stuck in her throat because deep down, she knew they would be a lie. The intensity in Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "I know you," he said, softer now, almost pleading. "And I know this isn't you." Maria felt the walls closing in around her. The weight of expectation, of duty, of fear, it pressed against her chest until she could hardly breathe. She had spent so long convincing herself that she had done the right thing. That this life, this marriage, was the best path for her and Matthew. But standing here, with Daniel looking at her like she was still the woman she used to be, she felt the cracks in her carefully built facade begin to splinter. Before she could respond, a hand clamped down on her wrist. Her pulse jumped. James. His grip was tight, too tight, his smile controlled but his eyes cold as he glanced between her and Daniel. The room around them continued in its festivities, oblivious to the storm brewing in this small corner. "Maria," James said smoothly, his voice a warning wrapped in silk. "I believe we were in the middle of something." Maria felt the weight of Daniel's stare, the silent challenge in his eyes, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Was she going to walk away with James? Or was she going to choose herself? Her heart pounded as she realized, with terrifying certainty, that tonight would change everything. The moment James tightened his grip on Maria's wrist, a cold shiver ran down her spine. His fingers, firm and possessive, sent a silent message, one she had learned to decipher over the years. He was displeased, and when James was displeased, there were always consequences. Daniel didn't move, but the flicker of tension in his jaw told Maria he had noticed the gesture. His eyes darkened, a slow, simmering anger building beneath his otherwise calm exterior. For a moment, it felt as though the air between the three of them had thickened. The noise of the party fading into a distant hum. Maria forced herself to smile, to slip back into the role she had perfected. The devoted wife, the woman who had everything she was supposed to want. "Of course, darling," she murmured, pulling her wrist free with practiced ease. "Shall we?" James didn't answer, but the flash of approval in his eyes told her he was satisfied. He slid his arm around her waist again, leading her away from Daniel, who stood motionless, watching her go. But Maria felt it, the weight of his gaze, the silent plea that told her this wasn't over. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of meaningless conversation, of polite laughter and toasts raised in their honor. Maria played her part, but inside, she was unraveling. Every glance James threw her way felt like a test. Every passing thought of Daniel felt like a betrayal. As the night wound down and the last of the guests began to depart, James leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "We need to talk," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "Upstairs, now." Maria swallowed hard but nodded. There was no point in arguing. She followed him up the grand staircase, her heart hammering with each step. The moment they stepped into their bedroom, James shut the door behind them with a quiet click. "Care to explain?" he asked, his tone dangerously soft. Maria turned to face him, forcing herself to appear composed. "Explain what?" James let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "Don't insult my intelligence." Maria, Daniel, what was he doing here? She hesitated, knowing that whatever she said would either fuel the fire or momentarily extinguish it. He was just another guest, she said carefully, nothing more. James took a slow step forward, and Maria instinctively stiffened. You think I didn't see the way he looked at you? The way you looked at him? His voice was lower now, laced with something more dangerous than anger, control. Maria's breath caught in her throat, but she held his gaze. You're imagining things. James reached out, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, but the steel in his eyes made her stomach twist. You're mine, Maria. I suggest you don't forget that. A chill crept down her spine. And for the first time in years, she realized she didn't want to be his anymore. Maria sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clenched tightly in her lap as James studied her in that unnervingly calm way of his. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface of his carefully controlled demeanor. She had learned over the years that James rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. His power lay in the way he could make her feel as though every step she took was on the edge of a knife. A single misstep away from disaster. You're quiet, he finally said, his voice smooth, measured. That's never a good sign. Maria forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to look away. What do you want me to say, James? His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. The truth would be a good start. She exhaled slowly, willing her heart to steady. There's nothing between Daniel and me. The words felt hollow, even to her own ears. James tilted his head slightly, his fingers drumming against the wooden armrest of the chair he had settled into. You're a terrible liar, Maria. Her stomach knotted, but she refused to let the fear show. Then why bother asking? For a moment, there was only silence. Then, in one fluid motion, James rose to his feet, crossing the space between them in measured, deliberate strides. He leaned down, placing his hands on either side of her, effectively trapping her in place. Because I want to hear you say it, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to hear you deny what I already know. Maria swallowed hard, her pulse pounding. She had played this game before, danced this delicate waltz where every word, every movement, was a calculated risk, but tonight felt different. Tonight, there was something shifting inside her, something dangerous and uncontainable. I'm tired, James, she said finally, her voice barely steady. His gaze flickered with something unreadable. Tired of what? She hesitated, knowing the truth teetered on the edge of her lips, waiting to be spoken into existence. Of pretending, she whispered. Of this. For the first time, James didn't respond immediately. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable, his jaw tightening just slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more dangerous. Careful, Maria. A warning, a promise. And yet, for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid anymore. The night was heavy with tension, the kind that coiled around Maria's chest like an iron chain, tightening with every breath she took. The dim light from the chandelier above cast long shadows across the room, distorting James's face as he stood before her. Unreadable and unmoving, she could feel the weight of his gaze pressing against her, searching for something, weakness, guilt, regret, but Maria had nothing left to give him. You think this is a game, don't you? James finally said, his voice low, controlled, but edged with something sharp beneath the surface. Maria clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. I never said that. His chuckle was humorless. You didn't have to. He took a slow step toward her, and instinctively, she stiffened, though she refused to back away. I wonder, Maria, do you truly understand what you've done? 1,000 responses flickered through her mind, but none seemed right. Did she regret it? No. Did she fear what came next? Maybe, but there was no turning back now. Not after everything. You don't own me, James, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. His eyes darkened, the smirk on his lips disappearing like a candle snuffed out by the wind. Is that what you tell yourself? Another step closer. Maria could feel the heat radiating from him, the air charged with something electric, volatile, because we both know that's not true. She swallowed hard but held her ground. You're wrong. James tilted his head slightly, studying her as though she were a puzzle he had yet to solve. Am I? His voice was softer now, almost gentle, but Maria knew better than to trust it. Tell me, then, if you're so free, why are you still here? The question slammed into her like a wave against jagged rocks. Why was she still here? Why hadn't she run? Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something worse, something she wasn't ready to name. You don't get to control me anymore, she said, though the words tasted like uncertainty on her tongue. James's expression didn't change, but something in the air between them shifted. Slowly, he leaned in, his lips so close to her ear that she could feel his breath. Warm and deliberate. Then prove it. Maria's heart pounded, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was something else, something dangerous, something exhilarating, and she had no idea if she was ready for it. The storm outside raged with a fury that mirrored the turmoil inside Maria's chest. Rain lashed against the windows, the wind howling like a wounded beast, but none of it was as deafening as the silence stretching between her and James. The room felt suffocating, thick with unsaid words, unspoken truths, and a tension so palpable it pressed against her skin like a second layer. James stood by the fireplace, his fingers tracing the rim of a crystal glass filled with dark amber liquid. He hadn't taken a sip, hadn't moved beyond that simple, mindless motion, but Maria knew better than to mistake stillness for calm. His silence was a weapon, one far deadlier than any outburst. You wanted this, didn't you? His voice, though quiet, carried through the space, slicing through the air like a blade. Maria's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stand taller, meeting his gaze even as her pulse pounded in her throat. Wanted what? She asked, though she knew the answer. James exhaled a humorless laugh, finally lifting the glass but only to swirl the liquid within. Don't play games with me, Maria. You knew exactly what you were doing. She swallowed, her nails digging into her palms. I did what I had to do. At that, he turned, finally looking at her, and the weight of his stare nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Those eyes, once warm, once filled with something that might have been love, were now unreadable. Cold steel in the dim light. Is that what helps you sleep at night? He took a step closer, his movements slow, deliberate. Telling yourself you had no choice? Maria refused to look away. I made my choice, James, just like you made yours. Something flickered across his face, anger, maybe, or something darker, something even he didn't want to name. He took another step, and suddenly, the space between them was almost non-existent. The scent of whiskey and storm-drenched air clung to him. Intoxicating, dangerous. Then tell me, he murmured, voice dangerously low. Do you regret it? The words hung between them, heavy, suffocating. Did she? Maria searched his face, looking for the man she had once known. The man she had once. No. That part of her life was over. It had to be. So she lifted her chin, steadied her breath, and whispered, no. A muscle in his jaw ticked, his grip tightening around the glass before. With a sharp inhale, he stepped back. Then I suppose there's nothing left to say. And just like that, the distance between them was more than just physical. It was final. It was irreversible. Yet, as he turned away, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shattered, and she wasn't sure if it was the storm outside or something deep inside her. The night was thick with tension, the kind that clung to the air like a storm waiting to break. Maria stood motionless, her breath shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched James disappear into the darkness beyond the doorway. The echo of his footsteps faded, swallowed by the night, but the weight of his presence lingered, pressing down on her chest like an invisible hand. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. She had told herself over and over that this was the right thing, that the path she had chosen was the only one left. And yet, as the silence in the room deepened, stretching wide and hollow, doubt slithered into the cracks of her resolve. Outside, the storm raged on, rain drumming against the windows, lightning tearing jagged scars through the sky. The flickering candlelight cast restless shadows across the walls, their wavering forms almost alive, almost whispering. Maria could feel it, something shifting, something unraveling. She moved toward the window, her reflection barely visible against the glass, distorted by streaks of rain. Somewhere out there, James was walking away from her. From everything they had built. Everything they had destroyed. Was this truly the end? A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes. And with it came a distant crash, something breaking. Maria flinched, her pulse stuttering. She turned sharply, her gaze sweeping the room, searching for the source. Her eyes landed on the table where James had set his glass just moments ago. It was overturned now, amber liquid spreading across the polished wood, the shards of crystal glinting in the dim light like tiny, shattered stars. She exhaled slowly. A sign? Or just an accident? Either way, she knew one thing with bone-deep certainty, no matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise. Some things, once broken, could never be put back together.